of our hands. Amen. Please be seated. So I thought it might be wiser for me to conclude this series of teachings I've been having with the death of Moses as reported in Deuteronomy today. I would want to point out to us a few items I find very interesting. The first one, obviously, is it is reported in the story that Moses died up in the mountain and the Lord buried him. Up until today, no one knows where Moses is buried. And obviously, being a theologian, I always want to ask the question, so how did they know he was dead? Because no one knows where he's buried. And they were not there, so who brought the story from up there to say Moses is dead? All we know is they went into mourning for 30 days. The other thing that we get to know from the story is definitely it is not Moses who wrote this story, because there are those that love saying that Deuteronomy was written by Moses. He couldn't have written it because as this is happening, he's dead. So it's not him writing. But let's work with that first part first before I go to what I want to call the major emphasis of my message today. Moses had been such a remarkable person, performing the greatest of miracles. Even that passage records that since Moses, no other prophet has ever risen who can do and could do the kind of things that Moses did. Now, when you understand what a personality cult is, I hope you do, because we experience these things in American politics, and I see it's predominant now in South African politics, even in religion. And you'll understand this, I don't want to use people's names today. But people begin to venerate and worship an individual, that their focus becomes that person and not God. So you develop a personality cult. They believe in this person so much that they are prepared to let go of their mental faculties in order to follow this particular individual. So it makes sense to me that when Moses died, God made sure that his grave would not be seen, because I want to assure you, the children of Israel, who had so quickly started worshipping an idol, that golden calf, would have started worshipping the grave of Moses. I want to assure you, because they'd seen this man perform miracles, they would have decided, okay, Moses was up the mountain, we had nothing to worship, he created a calf for us. Now he's dead, Moses, do things for us. They would start negotiating with Moses and disregard God. So the only way was, you shouldn't see the grave. Secondly, I do not think the children of Israel would have continued into Canaan. They would have stayed there and camped around Moses' grave and said, this is home. So it was important for God to remove, literally, the presence and memory of Moses and say, move on. Because quite often we are stuck with the personality cult, we are stuck with the individual, and we forget our focus on God, because now we want this person. We have seen them do good for us. We have seen them being used by God. We have seen wonderful things happen in their name. Now their focus becomes that. So the success of this story of the children of Israel moving from Egypt into Canaan was important. Had to be realized, but as long as Moses was still in the picture, as long as they would have known where he is, I'm sure even up until today, people would have been visiting the grave of Moses to try and, get a miracle or two. But we can't do that because we don't know where it is. Because people would have wanted to say, I touched the grave of the most important prophet ever. We don't have that privilege. However, here is the story that I want us to think about. As a church, this worries me, friends. As families, and as a nation. When Moses died, Scripture reports that, and now Joshua, the son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom, and he took over leadership from Moses. It's qualified because Moses had laid his hand upon him. Now, I want you to understand this laying on of hands so that you understand maybe where we might be going wrong. The laying on of hands is what we would call impartation. That means Moses took from himself the giftedness that God had placed on him and transferred it into Joshua to make sure that when I am no longer there is someone else to take over from me. Do you follow? Moses imparted his gift to Joshua, making sure that there is what we should be calling succession planning. The future is set. You notice, if we continue the story, that Joshua didn't do the same. When Joshua died, that was the end of goodness. But Moses made sure that by the laying on of hands, he transferred. I worry for this church. And by this church, I mean the Church of Jesus Christ. I worry that we no longer perhaps do this succession planning by the transference of our giftedness to other people, making sure that the good we have, and I'm talking to those of you who are a little older than I am as well, that we need to make sure that whatever God has bestowed upon us, we hand over so that the future generation does well. I will give you an example. If you know families where they have good businesses, a family business, whoever started the business, as long as they are alive, the business will thrive. Let them die and see what happens. Everything goes to the ground. Because there was no impartation. There was no giving of what I am able to do to the other. The laying on of hands. This is why I want to argue this today. This is why someone once said to me, no, please don't use your hands to smack your child. Get a stick. Well, sorry for those of you who believe in human rights. Get a stick or a belt and smack them, because only use your hands to pray for them so that you transfer goodness. Don't use your hand to smack them, because this is a hand of blessing. It's a hand of transferring goodness on them. And I want to imagine that even as a country, this is the one thing we learn, transferring goodness. In actual fact, if anything, in this country and everywhere else, we seem to be able to impart wrong things. We impart corruption. I mean, and those that come after us, they perfect it. We impart everything else that is negative. We do not do what Moses did. Moses knew this journey was not ending in the desert. Moses knew that the people of Israel still had to get to the promised land, and the only way to do that, they needed to be leaders. They needed to be a person among them who was able to deliver as he did. So I want to challenge every individual seated here. If you were to go today, what would you have imparted on the next generation? What would you stand and say, God, this is what you gave me, this is what I handed over? What would you be able to say then? Because the church of God is dying. Our children are dying. Our nation is dying because we are not handing over anything. Vision is blurred. We don't even know where we are going. We don't know what needs to be done. It just becomes routine. We wake up, we go to work, we come home, we eat, and that's it. But there is no divine impartation. There is no giving over, handing over of excellence. There is no deliberate, intentional leadership. This is a spiritual thing. Friends, when I speak about this and I speak about politics in the nation, it's because nationhood is a spirituality. God does not reside in this church. God resides in the world that we live in, isn't it? So God is interested in how well we do when we're out there. God is interested in how well we do in our workplaces. God is interested in how well we do in schools. God is interested in how well we do as a nation. So Moses was leading a whole nation. He was not just leading them to prayer. He was leading them to possessing land. He was leading them to making wealth. He was leading them to make sure they were developing relationships. And in doing so, they needed good spiritual leadership, deliberately handed over by the laying on of hands. I know that quite often when people think of laying on of hands, they are thinking of prayer for healing, isn't it? Oh, I am sick. Mfundisi, please lay hands on me. But don't you think it would be wonderful if we were laying hands on each other to transfer leadership? To transfer skill. If you were laying hands on the people around you, on your children, on your friends, on family, to say, God has empowered me with something. God has given me something. And I want to make sure that this gift doesn't die with me. We struggle as a people, again last week I mentioned this, even to elect new leaders for the church, to elect bishops. We don't even know what to do with ourselves because nothing good perhaps was handed over. We don't know what to do as a church. I challenge you, those of you who are sitting here in parish council, when the time comes to go, what do you leave behind? Chaos, confusion, backbiting? What do you leave? Oh, I used to be in council. I used to be a church warden. So what? What did you impart? What did you hand over? When one day you walk away, what did you hand over as a parent? What did you hand over as a person in the community? That I took a young man and I sat down with this young man. I know a young woman who was struggling and I called them and I sat down with them and I shared my wisdom with them to make sure that when I was gone, there was somebody in the community who learned from me. That's the story of Moses. So Moses, from birth to death, makes sure that whatever he has gathered along the journey, he leaves it with someone. So stop hoarding your goodness and keeping it to yourself and say, I don't want to share with anybody. Because that's the problem. I don't want people to know anything from me in case they learn and then they defeat me and they do better than me. No. Make sure, Church of God, make sure, people, make sure, my friends, that whatever God has given you and is good, impart it into the next generation. I fear that if we don't do that, this is what we'll do. We'll always regret. Oh, this generation is bad. This generation, they don't know what they're doing. Well, they don't know what they're doing because we gave them nothing. Impart the goodness God has given them.